Morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Facebook Live from Movember. Just a quick introduction as to who I am. I'm Mark Hedstrom. I'm the Executive Director for the Foundation here in the US, and want to thank everyone for joining us today on this important conversation and topic. What we'll be looking to tackle today is mental health in the workplace, particularly for those in the BIPOC community and some of the challenges that we see as well as they see from lived experience. So really excited to have this panel together. Really excited that you're all here today. I want to thank the panelists as well as the moderator. I'm going to turn it over to John Eligon. And John, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's great to be here and great to be with you all. As Mark mentioned, my name is John Eligon, and I'm a reporter at the New York Times, currently covering issues of race in America. And so we have a great discussion for you today. We have some very great panelists, and I want to thank Movember for allowing us this platform to talk about this very important issue that we're going to talk about today during Mental Health Awareness Month. And as Mark mentioned, we'll be talking about BIPOC mental health and the workplace, and in particular, looking at DEI and what organizations have and can be doing in this space. So as I said, we have a great panel. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. So first, James.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is James Alva. I just left corporate America, where I was working at Citigroup for the last 6 years as the Western market leader for community investing and development. But I've since founded my own consulting firm called Adelante Partners, helping organizations get to the next level, including issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, James. Next, we have Love.
Hi, really grateful to be here. I thought I saw an ear thing, like, can you hear me? My name is Love Odih Kumuyi. I use she, her pronouns, and I head up the Unsiloed team, and I have worked across many industries, but particularly focused on helping organizations think about what human rights and inclusion looks like on an everyday experience. So that's really what drives me. After spinning out of a career in law, I now help organizations just make the idea of justice an everyday conversation. So really happy to be here.
Great. We're really happy to have you. Next, we have Sedrick.
Yes, how you doing? Sedrick Spenser. Thank you for having me today. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for about 20 years now. I currently work for a company called Biogen, and I'm just here to just add to the conversation about mental health and what we can do in the D&I space. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Sedrick. And last but certainly not least, we have KT.
Yes, hi everyone. So Katrina Thornton, I go by KT, pronouns she, her, hers. And I currently serve as the Senior Director of Global Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Kellogg Company. And so really excited to be joining some amazing colleagues today as we talk about mental health.
Great. Well, thank you. It's great to have you, KT. So I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we will try to answer some of them. I want to start off, before we kind of get into some of the specifics and whatnot, I want to ask more broadly, over the past year, we've seen, a pandemic that has disproportionately hit communities of color, that has kind of had a strain on everyone's mental health in some ways. We've seen a lot of the protests around police killings and police violence that have particularly impacted communities of color and particularly impacted mental health in that way. And we've seen unprecedented support for things like these. And so I'm wondering, from a perspective of workplaces, like what type of space has the last year created in allowing us to confront these issues in the workplace? And Katie, I want to start with you. Being at Kellogg and doing diversity and equity work there. Yeah. How have things changed over the past year in terms of how you all are addressing it as a result of all that we've gone through?
Yeah, no, great question. I would say, the organization has been super intentional, right? So I think confront just everything that's happened from the pandemic to the racial tensions and the violence against multiple communities of color, and really creating the opportunity to have our employees have a safe space to address that and express how they feel, how that's impacting them when they do show up to work, and that sometimes impact their performance, right? So understanding the multiple dynamics that come along with that. I would say a few things that Kellogg has done that we really kicked off. I will start first from the mental and emotional health. It was really, really neat. I want to say it started in April of 2020, and for each month, actually in 2020, I actually had an external speaker come and talk about mindfulness and really unpack that. And it was across the globe. And so whether we talked about power of gratitude, how to now navigate and deal with social distancing. What does that mean with stress and anxiety? How does that show up potentially for your children if you have children? So creating a space as a company to take a moment to disconnect from work and actually practice mindfulness and getting some tips how to navigate that, I think was huge. And then we look at our total health and our ED&I efforts, not separately, but jointly, right? So we look at social health as being a part of ED&I. And so when a lot of the racial tensions and unrest was occurring, especially with the murder of George Floyd and that being a catalyst, and even more recently, violence against our AAPI community, there were town halls, there were forums for employees, there were a lot of listening sessions, company-wide and individually with our business employee resource groups, as well as within functions and businesses. And so it created a space, not for our folks to talk about it, but then to determine what actions do we need to do as a company to address both the mental health component as well as our ED&I efforts, which we wanted to make sure it was jointly efforts there.
Thank you. And I wonder with you, Sedrick, I mean, what have you seen, within Biogen, like all this stuff happening, has it made people more, willing or eager to address these issues? Like how has it looked inside of where you're at?
Sure, and I think, same as KT, we see an opportunity to come in and just basically talk about what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. We did the same when the situation happened with George Floyd, as well as with the API community in Atlanta, where we took some time apart as a group, and then we, as an organization, also had an opportunity just to talk about the history, what has gone on in the past, and then how we correct ourselves kind of moving forward in the future, specifically dealing with inside the organization.
Gotcha. And I'm curious, both Love and James, you all both work, with companies, kind of, outside advisors and whatnot. How has that, have you all seen the eagerness and the willingness of companies to engage in this stuff change over the past year? James, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, yeah, happy to start. And first, I'll answer from the perspective of inside a company, having just left Citi a couple months ago. I think when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of uncertainty, how to deal with it. But then with the awful murder of George Floyd and people really having to confront issues of racial tension in this country, I think we found that companies had to really address it at that point. And what I found is that there was sometimes a disconnect between how the company would respond globally and how that would translate to an individual work group. And one of the things that the group that I was in did is scheduled a 90-minute a week optional call for people just to come in and talk about how we were feeling, what was going on. It was not a work conversation. And from that, people really got more comfortable with addressing issues of mental health and just what was going on. And that helped, I think, our leadership team be better leaders. And so I think there needs to be a connection between what the company stands for overall and how that's translating down the line and across divisions. And so that's something that, in working with different organizations, that I like to talk about, is what is the experience like for different individuals at your organization, and not just, what is the organization externally saying that they stand for.
Gotcha. And Love, and you talked about how, you work with companies on issues of human rights and the idea of justice. In some ways, you think that you would hope that would kind of be naturally in the DNA and the fabric of companies and whatnot. I imagine it's not always that way, and I'm kind of curious how this past year has kind of impacted that work that you do.
Yeah. So while I frame my work as that, thinking about rights, I think most people call it like diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I feel like I'm in a choir here with the rest of the panelists, right? Yeah. So facilitating all the dialogues. But to say something a little bit different is grappling with the idea that in talking about this, while some persons are like, let's move forward, let's make changes, these conversations can be triggering and can cause past traumas to resurface. So a lot of things that people are like, I thought we were past that, or that was like a long time ago, why are we talking about this? Making space to talk about mental health and talk about the racialized experiences means that we might have to grapple with a time before now when we did not talk about those things. So I think that's another lens that is also present at the table while we want to be ambitious and hit the reset button on all the ways in which we want to remain optimistic. Mental health also means making space for people to really explore the ways in which they may not have been supported before now, or explore the ways in which they might have had colleagues leave or be traumatized in ways that they did not feel supported. So there's a little bit of dissonance that's happening in terms of why this, why now? Did we not see this before? Did we not hear this before? Which takes me to sort of like making sure that we're balancing like with accountability and a sense of integrity in leadership, right? Because a lot of my work has been helping people understand that there oftentimes is a gap between the rhetoric, the things that are said, and the actions that people experience. And usually that's, I think somewhere within that gap is where the trauma lies, because it feels like I call professional gaslighting. It's like, I am hearing all this stuff that you say that you're doing, but that's not really what I feel on my team. So I think making space to even just name and acknowledge that this is a journey and we haven't gotten this right is also part of creating a safe space or psychologically safe environment for everyone. So that's I think is also just like part of like the conversation that has to be taken into consideration.
Is it, you mentioned, it can be traumatizing for people, Love. I wonder, is it ever triggering in the opposite direction where you get pushback? You get people from, who for them, maybe these are not issues they've ever had to confront in their lives. And now suddenly they feel like they're being swept up in this whole organizational shift or organizational reckoning with this thing. How does it work like that as well? And then how do you kind of confront and deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is very present. And my team and I, we are constantly talking about this, and we like to categorize it in three ways. If you think of a boat, there's like the choir, which I imagine are most folks in the call. And there's the movable middle. There are people who are like, oh, I think this is possible. And oh, this is really bad. And then there are those who are on the other end, the detractors. They're probably about this, and sometimes your voice can feel quite loud. So often manage that the choir doesn't get exhausted and burnt out, and the movable middle actually is pushed in the right direction. But detraction, like when we think about race and people's racialized experiences, people's contact experience with race comes at different points in their life. And part of the work is identifying where people are in their journey. And I always use the framing of journey, because is the work ever really done? I'm not quite sure, right? Like, because we can't sort of like undo like hundreds of years of atrocities. We can always continue to do right by those folks, right? So making sure that we're letting people know that you're committing to a journey. You're not committing to a one-off checkbox like workshop and racism is fixed and microaggressions are fixed. And letting them know that if we take more of a journey approach as opposed to a sprint, then we will be committed to that work. But I think a lot of it also, I heard KT mention mindfulness. There's a lot of empathy that has to come into this work from the practitioner's space.
We're having a little bit
there's just like toggling between remain somewhat empathetic to the fact that this is like such a new experience for some people, and doing what it takes to do the work alongside them. So it's a hard line to balance, I'll say.
Yeah, definitely. And as I think we all would agree on this chat, in this discussion, that there are very specific challenges and unique challenges in some ways to BIPOC communities. And KT, I want to ask you, I mean, how do you address those specific challenges, but also kind of in the vein of what Love was just talking about? Like, how do you do it in a way though that still feels inclusive of everyone in the organization?
Great question. And I think many organizations are grappling with that same question. Love, who I love, your name, Love, it just came out of a pretty intensive ED&I learning immersion we did with our senior leaders and extended leadership team and people managers over the course of several weeks. And the vendor that talks about many of the characteristics is how do you manage the paradoxes, right? And that's real, because the piece that we've done at Kellogg to try to say, how do we start from a place? And we use the aspect as well of the journey, give grace while on the journey, but don't allow the concept of journey to become a stagnant point or an excuse for stagnation, right? And so we started to talk through really revamping our entire ED&I strategy and say, we're going to lead with equity. And we chose that intentionally because when we look at that, it's saying, what are the intangible and tangible barriers that need to be broken down to ensure fair and consistency? So we tried to start from that angle because we knew the sensitive topic, there would be, okay, the intentionality now that's around ED&I, and at Kellogg, D&I had always been a part of our company culture. It was just a different intentionality across the globe. It's how do we make sure we drive the level of inclusiveness, but before we get to the diversity component where we can be like, well, oh my goodness, what dimension do I fall in? It's no, let's just tackle the systemic and the aspects that may be unfair or inconsistent, and let's balance that of how are the barriers can be broken to pave the way for diversity and inclusion. And that's the way we've been going forth with it. We're not there yet. We know some of our groups say, hey, I feel left out. What about me? But I think the more and more we explain, one, the reasons why, and two, data is our friend. It helps to bring in the factual component to say data is informing some of our actions and intentionality where there's a lack of representation, whether it's in our with our employee base and how our go-to-market strategies show up in the marketplace, how we invest in our communities. Let data be a leading factor. So it's at times fact over feeling to help create the right visibility. Because I think when people don't know, create their own scenarios that sometimes draw the exclusion piece to even go further.
Mm-hmm. Fact over feeling. I think that's a great way to put it. And I wonder, Sedrick, in your where you're at, I mean, how much do you have to, look and really help people understand the specific needs for specific communities and making that being part of the work in terms of addressing mental health challenges?
I think it's a constant teaching that we have to do every day in the workplace. It's not often that you, in corporate America that I've experienced it, you get to show up and be your authentic self, right? I have to, dress, talk, and act one way here. And then when I'm at home or when I'm, with my boys or whoever, I have, it's a different communication, right? So when it comes to my colleagues, it's a constant education about, me culturally or any of my other colleagues culturally about, who we are, where we are, and kind of where we come from, and then a different perspective we bring to the table. A lot of the challenge that we have, the pharmaceutical industry is probably a very white industry if you look at it across the board. Diversity is a place that we hurt, and we look to bring, more people of color in. So it's almost, you have to educate those managers that are hiring and what's the value of having a diverse team at the table. So it is a daily grind. It is a daily battle that we engage in. But, I always say that we're at the table or we're in the office to clear the trees for those who come behind us. So it's something that is definitely worth fighting for. Gotcha.
James, I want to turn to you. When we're talking about dealing with mental health issues, I think one thing that can sometimes be difficult for employers and for companies is this balance between, productivity and then taking time to deal with some of these concerns of mental health and making sure, employees needs are met. What is the balance there? Like, how do you approach companies and what is the balance there in terms of like productivity versus also attending to making sure that people have the space and the time to take care of their mental health?
Yep. So there are a couple ways to, I think, address this balance when we're talking about productivity. Productivity, really can be broken down into some different things, and it can really be productivity if you start to break that down across particularly people of color and how they are experiencing corporate America. Can feel like it's a different solution for people of color within the same company than for people who are not. And when we think about what's happened over the last 14 months or so with the pandemic, with the racial reckoning that we've had, we've really seen this ability for companies and for people to feel like you can be more open. And I think what Love talked about, this trauma that people are experiencing, is definitely a real thing. And then what Sedrick said in terms of making sure that the managers really have that training is really important. When you think about productivity, I had Googled in preparation for this, $51 billion. That's a lot of money. $51 billion is the estimated cost of productivity losses for people experiencing mental health in the workplace. So when you can translate that, as KT said, data is your friend, when you can translate that into dollars and cents, that's the kind of thing that sparks people's attention. But then how do you operationalize that? Okay, so that's a lot of money. What do I do now? And I think one of the things that you do is what Sedrick talked about. You think about people who have gotten promoted in corporate America who are leading teams. Generally, and not always, but in many cases, and having come from the world of banking, generally people who are in leadership positions tend to not be people who identify as BIPOC, and yet are dealing with many mental health issues with BIPOC employees who can be, and not always, but entry-level, middle-level managers on their way on that promotional opportunity. And so when you think about people who have risen in the ranks, they've risen because maybe they've been high performers, they've, et cetera, been able to get promoted, but we're generally not training our managers and leaders in companies about how to deal with mental health issues. And when you can link that back to loss of productivity, loss of revenue, that's a game changer in terms of companies. And so I think it's a blend of all these different things, but productivity, loss of revenue, and what that can really mean in terms of the mental health of your employees is really a good starting point. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry to say this to some of the men here, but we also just need to make sure that we have more women in senior leadership positions, because we need a variety of lenses, and it tends to be too many men talking about the same things, and we're not coming up with new creative solutions on our own. And we really need to have more women in senior leadership roles, in executive roles, and really helping to drive the conversation in a more well-rounded way.
Yeah,
James, I don't think you needed to apologize for that. I think that's all about gender parity. So we welcome that.
I do too.
We should all be embracing that, certainly. And when you talk about fact over feelings, that 51 billion, was it 51 billion in productivity? I mean, that right there is a fact, right? And I'm curious, KT, I mean, when you engage with your company, with people who you answer to, on that, are you bringing, are those the types of facts you're bringing? Like how are you showing them that, hey, this should be part of our working operation? This is not just something to do on the side, taking care of our employees' mental health. It's central to us doing our job right.
Yeah, absolutely. And our total rewards, with the total health component, like I said, done a really nice job of tying what is our total overall health. So mental health, financial health, social health, like how does all that show up to really drive employee engagement, which we know clearly James just outlined for us, it drives greater productivity, drives revenue, profit, et cetera. And so it's almost the business case that you put before. But one piece that has also helped within Kellogg, one of our BERGs is capable. And that is our business employee resource group that looks at our differently abled employee base. And one of the reasons why we say business employee resource group is because each of our BERGs, kind of that's what we call them, really partner with the business to drive initiatives that's just not from an inclusion standpoint with our employees and a diverse perspective, but also the business impact. And so some really neat ways and partnerships we're driving that too. So it really shows a holistic approach versus it being, is it a thing we have to do versus it's an expectation because it's a business imperative for both our employees, our bottom line, and at the end of the day, our reputation, right? And we're talking about diversity, and that's that you have to, that stigma that's there. And sometimes mental health is the one that's not spoken about, right? Because at times it's unseen, and what does that look like? I think that's what we continue to break through with it, having the ands. I know I said fact over feeling, sometimes it's fact and feeling, to help bring the holistic approach together. And based on your audience, knowing which way you may have to lean in. If you have a very P&L type leader, let's talk about it from the business sense and what's that driving. But again, at the end of the day, if our people are our booster, because we need people to do the job, how do we show the connectiveness versus it being in silo? And I think that's what's been helping us tackle and get even better there. Again, on that journey, how we make sure the stigmas are broken down around mental health.
Yeah, I can't help but keep going back to what you talked about looking at this as human rights, and while the common term we use is DEI, but I love that talking about it in the framework of human rights. And sometimes I wonder, when you're out, working with companies, and you might have to address this issue of like, this being a business imperative or something like that. Is it also like in any ways like a human imperative? I don't know if that's the right term, but like, and is that also an argument to be made that, as you as just being a decent person need to be engaging in this with your employees?
100%. And I love that James came across that piece of data. And I sometimes find myself at the place where people are like, oh, like we want to make the business case for it. And I try to level set because I mean, we're talking about race and racism. And if we pause for a second, this has been built on the backs of a capitalist ideology around the use of Black and brown bodies for labor for profit. And that is hundreds of years old. So for me, that cannot be the only justification if we understand the deeply embedded ways in which the entire transatlantic slave trade was run on. Like we need productive Black and brown bodies to help us reap cane and crops and export and trade, right? Like for me, I think if we remember the history behind why we are having this conversation, then I think we would be more careful on the productivity link. So the productivity, I think, is a beneficial outcome because when people feel seen, heard, and valued, they will do well. They will thrive, they will contribute, and they will challenge the status quo, and they'll bring all that they can contribute to the table, right? Like that's a natural outcome. And there's clear data that shows whether it's women in leadership, the ROI for companies, or more diverse teams, the level of innovation and creativity, like that has been proven time and time again. So that cannot be the entry point, like right here. And if we were to connect it to, like, I do have companies say, like, wow, this diversity thing is a whole lot and we have a whole lot going on and we have projects. So it seems as if actually the competition is, can we do this diversity thing that's slowing us down and still be efficient and productive, right? So it almost now appears to be more so a tension than something that could be mutually reinforcing. But I like to help people think that sometimes we do have to slow down before we can speed up. And this is one of those things that it's a worthy investment in the people on whose backs you're building your profit, right? Like the least you can do is create the most humane conditions where people don't feel like they have to be silenced or they need to like take off an entire body of persona when they go home and they need therapy from the conditions that you've created for them to work in. And I think that's what we probably need to grapple with more of, right? So I think inclusion is old at a baseline, right? And then there are more things that come down there because in terms of even the facts versus feelings, like we could use data and talk about diversity. And then there are ways in which we can measure for things like psychological safety, because like if we're counting bodies in the room, there are lots of people who are diverse, a lot of companies that are diverse by chance because of where they're located, the nature of the industry. And you're like, oh, we have diverse bodies here. We're all nice to each other. We have happy hour. Like, that's not quite what we're looking for. Yeah. So like, do people feel like it's safe to be themselves? Do they feel like they will be punished if they challenge the status quo? Do people feel like promotion and ideas of equity is based on who you know, like, and trust, right? Because when we think about even how people are promoted, I don't think that we can say that there aren't smart Black and brown people and that's why they aren't in senior management. Like, I'll hedge a bet that it's pretty much because of affinity bias or because people are more tolerant of the mistakes of people who are like them, that they've been able to progress, right? So it's not even like, are we promoting the most competent persons, but just like being able to challenge some of the assumptions that we've made around the people who we are in everyday connection with. So yeah, I think it's a much deeper conversation. And sometimes we like to sort of like clean it up and put a nice bow and make a nice PowerPoint for it. But I think we kind of need to walk through the messy middle and just like grapple with like all the stuff before we think of like, okay, here's what's our strategy on a nicely bordered thing. Like we have to rumble with the truth of our history and our past.
Yeah, which is never easy in this, especially in this climate. We're in a very divisive climate right now, and rumbling with those truths. And I want to ask you, Sedrick, like, part of that is if you is being able to kind of be sensitive to someone else's needs, to people who don't look like you, to people who are not from experiences like you. How difficult is it to foster that empathy, to get folks, to get out of their shoes and getting someone else's shoes? I want to ask you two things. How difficult have you noticed that to be, or is it difficult? I guess I should ask. And two,
Right.
how do you go about like kind of working through that so that people can, empathize with people who maybe don't look like them?
Right, for sure. I don't think it's been difficult for people of color, just because I think naturally we'll come to the table and have these conversations. Even for white women, it hasn't been difficult, because in a lot of these conversations that we've had within the organization, white women are, they don't mind speaking up and being a part of the conversation. Where we've had some of the difficulty is, the white men and their participation. And, and I've talked to some of my, colleagues, and a lot of times they feel like they don't have anything to add to the conversation. For example, after the George Floyd murder, we had a conversation within our department, and there was probably about 90 of us on a call. And you can look at those who were being impacted by the conversation or even participated in the conversation. But unfortunately for us, white men didn't participate. So a lot of it is, and they, again, felt like they didn't have anything to add to the conversation. So it is one of those situations where you kind of have to let people come to the table and be open to whatever they have to bring to the table. You may disagree, but it's not a debate. It's not an argument. If this is how they feel, we have to welcome how they feel, and then have to educate from then on. So I think it's a process that we go through on a daily basis. But when it comes to certain sections or certain types of folks, we have to be a little bit more. I think Love said in the 3 different buckets, they're probably in that last bucket, and we have to make sure we kind of bring them along, probably a little slower than others.
James, I want to ask you, when it comes to, like Sedrick was just talking about bringing people along, is there also though that uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had, about like bringing along, but helping folks to understand? Because I think, naturally in some ways, all of us might be somewhat resistant to things that, may not be of our experience or maybe counter to our experience. How do you kind of grapple with that?
Yeah, I think I want to go back to something that Love said earlier on in the conversation, which was when we do open the door to start having these conversations, there's just a lot of trauma that comes out. And I think, as Sedrick mentioned, we as people of color are used to things like this. And it's sort of like over the last year or so, now the door has been open to talking about these issues in a transparent way. And all of a sudden, like, everything is coming out. And it's cathartic for us, but it can be very jarring if you haven't had those experiences. And you're getting it all at once. You're getting it at work. You're getting it in your news media, like it's everywhere. And it can be very overwhelming. And so if we think about it like a bit of a J curve, where maybe at first, you have to pause, you have to sort of dig deep a little bit and maybe slow down so that you can accelerate. If we provide those expectations up front, it won't be as scary to people, because I will be able to see that, okay, I need to get through this portion. I need to get through this J curve, let's just call it in business terms, right? I need to get through this curve so that we can accelerate. And I think if people can have a sense of where things are going, it won't be as scary, because if you don't know where things are going, or if you think that you just had that conversation and you did that diversity thing because you had that one conversation and now you've addressed, centuries of systemic inequities, but your one conversation now has solved it, you don't recognize that this is actually going to be the way things are or should be or need to be going forward. And so you need to provide a sense for your employees, for leaders at your company, what that journey is going to be looking like. You need to equip them with the tools. And I would even argue that you need to think about ways in which you can wrap that into their performance as leaders. How are they creating the right safe space, providing the psychological safety needed for employees. And I think if you translate it as part of people's evaluation, you will start to see some dramatic change in the workplace.
No, I think it's spot on when you say it can be, folks can see it as jarring, but I guess that's part of that empathy part, right? Because there are things that we as people of color have found jarring forever, and it's just kind of been part of the norm, right?
Right.
Yeah, I want to ask you, KT. I mean, can you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that about like kind of bringing people along.
Yeah.
Especially as I love how Sedrick put it. Like oftentimes it's the white men in the room who love them, but their experience is going to be different, and that's understandable.
It is. And I call it the third. So I think we all speaking because the reality is a part of it. And I think there has to be an acknowledgement that there may be a group that would never, ever want to participate, never be part of the change maker, never just don't agree with it. We all have our own ideologies. And to pretend that doesn't exist, I think could be disruptive to the organization as well, right? One of the things I think as we talk about, and I always go back to say, having grace for others, grace for yourself, but don't allow that to be an excuse to be stagnant. And really going back to James' point, one thing that we talked about, regardless of our ideologies, if you sit within the organization has a vision, a purpose, and values. And our role as leaders in the organization is that we align to the values and our behaviors are as such, right? And that's sometimes you may manage the different paradoxes, where your ideology is and where you want to actually be within an organization. So I think it's a piece to acknowledge it. And Love took literally the words I use all the time. It's messy, it's uncomfortable. We may have to lean in deeply and you may not agree. However, as leaders, how do we help each other on our collective journey? Because our individual journeys may look a little different. And I think you just have to keep providing. I do believe in different learning solutions. I do believe in the education. I think there needs to be their own education as well as what we also provide. But that accountability piece is huge as well. Because at the end of the day, it's the intentional actions that will drive sustained change. So you're not checking a box, you're not chasing a number. It is the behaviors that change the culture. And that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't. But I think we have to recognize the steps that need to be taken and sometimes, I don't want to say celebrate, but acknowledge the progress, but also challenge ourselves. What are the leaps? Because we want to stay in comfort. And when it gets icky, we want to fall back. And so I think it's, and I wouldn't necessarily balance, because I think times we need to over-index. I think balance causes us to sometimes stay in the status quo. So I think, how do we over-index, acknowledge, help bring people along? But I would say one piece, because we hear this a ton where, again, folks who may not identify, in this case, we're talking about as, we racially diverse or ethnically diverse, is that we have to be careful too, not to over-index to the other perspective because it's a discomfort. Because I think on the flip side, for so long, people of color have been there. They've been where they weren't at the table, right? Maybe they've been where they've felt like the outsiders. And so having intentionality, again, does not mean exclusion. It means intentional inclusion. And oftentimes starting looking at practices, what caused that, what caused it from a cultural standpoint. And then we have to be firm to say we're going to stick to what we stated, what we committed to. Because many organizations can put all the fun words out and we got these commitments, let's go. And you peel the onion back, it's like, oh, but we got pushback. Oh, this happened. It's more than words. It's hard work. It's deep rooted in many cases. And are you going to stick to it? I think it is. Just have to be careful we don't make an excuse for it when we're trying to address the paradoxes, if that's fair.
Now, keeping with our theme of mental health, I want to talk specifically about men when it comes to this discussion, because we've talked about racial diversity, but let's talk about men. And I'm curious, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. In what ways, we're in a society that pushes this idea of masculinity in so many ways. In what ways does that interfere or make it more challenging when you're talking and trying to get through on these issues of mental health specifically?
Yeah, I think, there are so many layers, right? When you start compounding identities, right? Like the experience of a white man versus the experience of a Black man, and the stories that they've been told about how they need to show up in the world. The stories that they've been told about to the degree that they should express pain, and to what degree does that impact who they are as a man, right? And then there's the other end of it, which is like being perceived as a stereotype threat, right? So not wanting to appear angry or not wanting to appear too vulnerable, right? So as someone who's not a man, I can imagine, right, like what that is to not express pain, discomfort, or not express vulnerability or seek help, because that might sort of like take away from our understanding of what it means to be a strong man or a successful man. So like there's that part. And then there are ways in which silencing of one's trauma gets expressed in holding that expectation for everyone else, right? Like now there's this sense that's perpetuated on everyone on my team. Like, what do you mean that you need time off? Like, why are we doing safe space stuff? Like, you know, like just like man up or boss up, like we use these terms all the time. And the data has shown that the pain of like Black men have been minimalized as far back as kindergarten, where Black boys get punished more frequently or harsher punishment than any other groups, like as young as 3 years old. So if you extrapolate that for what's happening 30, 40, 50 years into their future, it's almost like a normalization that like, I just need to tough it out. I just need to push through, you know, shoulders to the wheels and show that I'm good enough in this space. So I can imagine that that is incredibly difficult, because what it does, it gets in the way of help-seeking behaviors, which is something that the workplace should be encouraging. So when we think about what can companies or organizations do, is normalize help-seeking behaviors. But the thing about it is that if we're not addressing how people come to the table, we can offer employee resource programs all day long. No one's gonna show up and be like, you know, like, I'm having a tough day, right? Because that's just not celebrated. So even from a data point of view, having companies evaluate who are the people seeking help, like having, you know, people look at like who shows up to be supported. And I have noticed the same thing. I think Sedrick pointed that out. Predominantly the people who are having conversations around inclusion are women, right? Like there is that expectation around vulnerability or publicly opening up in that way. However, vulnerability has been shown to be a significant factor in what makes a strong and respected leader. So there are ways that it's going to pay off. And I think just helping people stay out to let them know that your team will actually respect you if you let them know that, hey, I made a mistake. I'm having a really tough day. I'm really going to slow down. Take your days off, take your mental health days off, like take your parental leave, like model that type of behavior so that everyone else can normalize it, even if before now they didn't think it was okay, or it might get in the way of their promotion or their ability to be respected at work. So I think it's like the organizational piece, but the intentional undoing by like modeling that strong leadership and having leaders even make sure that like toxic words or behaviors aren't like, you know, like not even celebrating like, oh, I'm running on 36 hours of no sleep. Like, oh, wow, like you're really pushing it. Like, no, like we're going to undo that kind of stuff, because that's not modeling the type of leadership that we want to see on our teams.
James, you had a thought on this?
Yes, thanks, John. So I just want to share, I feel compelled to share two personal stories that help answer this question. So the first is an experience that I had when I was in college. So I'm with one of my college roommates who's from Brazil. We're in the coffee house, which is like at that time, like the central place where all the students hang out. It's super busy. And we're talking, and he's talking to me about some problems he's having with his girlfriend. And then he says that, you know, he's going to go talk to his therapist about it. And when he said that, like, it was shocking to me. And I was like looking around, like, did anybody hear us? Did anybody hear him? I was worried for him. I didn't even say it. I was just sitting with him. And he said it in such a way that was so confident. And I must have had this look on my face. And he said, oh, you know, I forgot Americans have this thing with therapists. And he said, you know, the rest of the world, we don't. And so that is an experience that stuck out in my mind. And then the other personal story I'll share is that I'm a new dad. So I have twin baby boys. Thank you. I have twin baby boys at home. They are 8 months old and they are super cute. When they're sad, they cry. When they're happy, they laugh. Like they are just very in touch with whatever emotion they are experiencing. And I totally embrace it. And everybody around me embraces it because they are these cute, sweet little babies. Now, when I think about the world, what happens from the time those little guys are babies to the time I'm a college age student? What happens in society that changes my psyche, that makes me look around when somebody's talking about, this taboo thing around seeing a therapist, and I'm concerned for them? I shouldn't be concerned for them. I should be promoting it. I should be, how can I help you? How can I, go with you and support you versus, ooh, who might have heard that? And so what's happening in society that makes us feel like this is wrong? And I don't know that I necessarily have the right, perspective and answer, but when you layer that with, communities of color, I'm Latino, and, we have a lot of machismo in the culture and how that translates into how we feel. I think it really starts a lot with addressing situations. It starts with conversations like this. And it starts with people, in my opinion, who are willing to be leaders, like willing to be the Colin Kaepernicks and taking a knee and really taking a step and using their platforms as a way to bring awareness to these issues, so that when my little boys become a college age, and if they want to see a therapist, I hope that they do. And I hope that I'm the kind of parent who supports that. And we just need to keep promoting these sort of opportunities in our daily lives and not just in the workplace.
Certainly. And not to age you, James, but like, how long ago was the college example? And I asked this, there's a reason I'm asking, how long ago was the college example?
Well, it's okay. So I just turned 40, and this was when I think this conversation was when I was 20. So okay. It was 20 years ago, which feels way longer now that I say that out loud.
Yeah, and I asked you that because do you think it's changed since then in America in terms of the acceptance of therapy, mental health services?
So, I hope so. And I'm really hopeful about, future generations and younger generations in particular. And, I'm also a gay man. And so when I think about, multi-generations in the workplace, we think about code switching. The way I speak with older generations, people from older generations, is sometimes a little different than with younger generations because they just don't care. Like, it's just not a big deal. And so I think that as we can create safe spaces, particularly for younger people, that we will see change. And although I'm not necessarily in touch with current college age students, I'm really in touch with babies right now. But I really do hope that it has changed. But just in reflecting on my own experience, that's my truth. But I do hope that it has changed, and I think it has.
One more thing I'm curious on this topic, Sedrick, I wanted to ask you, like, I wonder how much leaning in, like, being a man doing this work, how much, from your own personal, is there a lead by example quality to that as well? Like, when with the other men in your company and or in your circles?
For sure. I definitely have to lead by example. I'm lucky enough to be a part of a fraternal organization, and our national president, started this initiative called Brother, You're on My Mind. Mm-hmm. So every Wednesday we reach out to, 2 or 3 other, members of our fraternity, and just to check in, right? And so I brought that into my workplace, where I just started to check in with my colleagues. Hey, how are you doing? Don't want to talk about work. I just want to check in with you to see where you are and how you're doing. And I would tell you what, it goes a long way. I think Love talked about being vulnerable to your staff or to your team. I think there's a level of trust that comes with that, just because now it's not all about work. It's about how they are and how they're doing in their personal life. So we lean in quite a bit, especially in my fraternal organization.
What fraternity?
I'm a Q.
Man, I would have never guessed Q. I honestly wouldn't have guessed Q, but I've never met you in person, so maybe.
It's all good.
I was thinking Alpha or something like that, but
okay.
I digress. We got a call from, a question from the Facebook chat, which is a very good question, because I think, in the context of this conversation, I think we're missing, our own experiences. We're all blessed to be in positions where we have, like, maybe corporate structures around us to take care of these things. People who are paid to look and deal with these. But this person asks, what about people working in non-corporate jobs where workers are not even recognized, where the stressors are more in the daily routine? Curious, Love, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think, you know, organizations come in all different sizes. So yes, that's a fully legitimate question. And sometimes organizations almost get so big that the structures do not take care of that, even at the micro level. But I do think, and that's why it's important to think of this from a human standpoint, right? As not just like, I mean, there's a business imperative, but from a human standpoint, I do think that there are some core skills and behaviors that our education system has not done right by us by not building those socio and emotional skills, emotional intelligence in the way that we interact with each other. So I could see where if you're not within a corporate structure or not within a team, you can normalize conversations around how do I show up, right? And what am I asking of my colleagues in this environment? And we've seen where there's a lot more advocacy for larger organizations who are even pushing for workers' union or some sort of unionization because they're trying to get some voice in spaces where they've lost that voice because of just the nature of that space. So I'll say, if where there is stress inherently built into the way that people work, we have to return to that deep human connection and recognizing that we all have a role to play in that small ripple of the world that we are trying to create. And sometimes that's why I really respect the work of activists. Like, we might need to put in a little bit more underground work, and those people who are in that space finding some way to check in with each other, to make space for each other, I mean, a basic free group chat. How are you doing? What do you need? How can I show up for you? Is sort of the ways in which I think we can begin to build momentum. And for whoever, is behind the money of that type of organization or that type of workforce, after a while, hopefully we will have a groundswell of advocacy around what's needed and being able to advocate with a collective voice. And I have just been heartened by how much work and advocacy that's out there. There are so many people who are putting in free labor into this, or unpaid labor rather, into this. And I think there are opportunities to probably look for some advocacy groups or some open source support to bring in that sort of more emotionally intelligent interaction, or lean into mental health practitioners who have been offering their time and labor to support people who are deeply affected but unsupported.
Katie, I'm curious, you're in the corporate setting, but do you have any advice for folks who are not in the corporate setting, like things that you can translate over maybe?
Yeah, and I will take a little bit of a different approach, because I know it's great when we talk about what can the organization provide and what does that look like. And I'll go a little bit more from an individual perspective, and something I had to do recently with my brother. I think there is power in courage, right? And I think in that piece is raising the hand. And my brother works in a non-corporate environment, and saying, hey, I'm going to challenge and encourage you at the same time to raise your hand or say, hey, I'm stressed. Hey, this isn't working for me, right? Hey, I'm going to use my voice to tell you what I need. And I think there's power in that courageous voice to come out too, because then you teach people how to treat you. You at least bring it up to say, acknowledge it, so people can say, oh, I didn't know. And that sometimes is breaking the ice there as well. So I think sometimes from that avenue, what is my individual way I can also stand up for myself, even if it's tough, and let people know what I do need to help me in my emotional health. And from there, that may open up room to say how that can help someone else, and or other resources that can come in a place that may not be in a corporate setting.
Gotcha.
If I may chime in a little, I think with what Casey just mentioned, there's also a power of allyship that's quite possible in that space. It's not unusual, even if it's not a corporate setting, that there might be one or two persons in a leadership position that is open to be more supportive, and not just raising the hand is important, but identifying who could be an ally and who can we have a conversation to build some connection and get some momentum might help those people drive that forward.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Love.
All right, so yeah, we're running out of time here. So I got one more question for everyone that I hope you all can chime in on here. I always like to be very solutions oriented with these things, right? To kind of, to the extent we can, give people advice or a roadmap, to follow, and companies and whatnot. So what would you all say? Like what are some of the key things that either companies or individuals should be doing on this front in terms of ensuring the mental health of their workforce, and specifically paying attention to the particular challenges of people of color? So what are some of the if there are a few bullet point things that you all would advise, what would those key things be? James, you want to start off?
Sure. So one, I said earlier, but I'm going to repeat it. Hire more women and hire more women in executive and senior level positions. Two, train anybody leading any person, whether it's a team or an individual, on mental health and why that's important. And then the third thing I'll offer is just something a little more tactical. Many organizations, whether you're small or large, what have you, you have some sort of paid time off. You might call it sick time, you might call it PTO, paid time off, whatever you may have. But generally, companies or organizations don't have a policy around what you need to disclose when you take one of those days. And so creating a culture that just says, I'm taking a PTO day. It could be for my mental health, it could be otherwise. But many times people feel an obligation to say, I'm taking a PTO day because of this and that. And it's sometimes that because that prevents people from taking that pause day, that mental health day that they might need. So creating that culture that you can take that day, it's your time, and you don't have to disclose why you're taking that day. So I think that's, for me, a tactical thing that all organizations can implement as part of their culture.
Great. Katie?
Yeah, and adding on that in a different way too, I think whatever organization you may be a part of or help lead, I think that overall benefits, or I would say total health or rewards package. So in addition to like the PTO, paid time off, et cetera, is it a way to incorporate something that will be of assistance, right? So is it counseling sessions? Is it something that takes it a little step further? And sometimes it's actually work with vendors to provide it for free for X amount of time. So I think there's ways to actually influence the system approach to actually provide a resource outside of that. I think that's one. And I think two, many companies obviously are really moving forward with ED&I or D&I, however you may look at it. How do you ensure mental health is a part of that dimension of diversity? And when you see that, then how do you take it a step further and say, how does that show up or may look differently based on multiple groups, right? Whether it's race, as we're talking about today, whether it's sexual orientation, even religious, there's so many different layers you can add on to it. I think it can help bring it to the forefront and make more folks aware.
Great. And Love, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll say all the good stuff they said, and counseling is important. Also, coaching. A lot of coaching is something that I have thought that has been in the past sort of like reserved for executives or high performing folks to get more productivity out of them. But there could be some more coaching to help people navigate a terrain that may not be, they do not have the social capital to navigate that terrain. So if you're first generation in your family to be in college or to be in a space, you just don't know what you don't know. You don't have the unwritten playbook. So offering that as a tactical way to help people to navigate what might feel normal to everyone, but more challenging to them. So that's like at the individual level. At the systems level, we've been supporting organizations or challenging them to measure psychological safety as a quantifiable metric of the culture that exists, right? And that is something that with the latest science around like culture can be identified, not just as a random survey, but with actions that can be done like thereafter. So there are ways in which we can get into the weeds and not just broad brushing solutions based on a diversity number on a demographic chart. So that's a deeper systemic layer that we should be taking a pulse on.
Great, thank you. And finally, Sedrick.
Sure, and I'll just take a different perspective as well. I chair a nonprofit organization. So as a nonprofit, I would say as an employee, make sure that, you know, the D&I issues or mental health issues for as employees to have safe place to have conversations is a part of that board's agenda. So when they go into the board meeting, they know that's something they have to discuss to make sure the employees are taken care of. And then as a former small business owner, I say you have to create a safe place for your employees to have conversation. And I know that a lot of times as a small business owner, you are, running your organization maybe on a thin line. So you need your employees to come in and be there. But I think as an individual, we have to take the responsibility to make sure that our employees, one, feel safe, they feel value, and that they can come to you and talk to you anytime they need to have a conversation about whatever it may be, or at least your management team has to provide that opportunity for your employees.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, Sedrick, James, Love, Katie. Thank you all so much. This was such an amazing conversation. I want to thank Movember again for allowing us to have this platform to have this discussion. And I want to thank everyone who joined us and who tuned in. We hope that today's conversation was helpful for you as you consider issues about mental health in the workplace, especially as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we hope that you continue this discussion. You can always learn more and find more resources at Movember.com. And once again, thank you, everyone, and we wish you all a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.